Let's talk about the historicity of Judith then.
Yes,
Because I know you have a slide prepared for that, and I'm very excited to dig into this topic because it's one that I find personally very fascinating. So let's
I don't know. Can you see the slides now?
I can. I don't know if you want to press
Mhm.
if you can full screen it though.
Right. Is it better now?
It's there it is now it is. Yep, there we are.
Ye- Yeah. So as you pointed it out, that when we look at the church fathers, we do really see that the early church does affirm Judith as being historical. For example, you mentioned Clement of Rome. I certainly agree. He did view as a factual person, not a fictional, just as Esther. He
Hmm.
mentions both Esther and Judith.
Yes, indeed.
And but even when you look at, for example, Augustine's list, so Augustine does make or does qualify which books are prophetical books and which are books are historical books. And curiously enough, he mentions or lists the Book of Judith among the historical books. So clearly, I think the church viewed it as historical. But even when you look at Jerome's preface to the Book of Judith, he mentions that even the Jews utilized these books, being in the Chaldean language, so it was Aramaic, but they have it among the historical books, very interestingly. So you have both Jews and Christians viewing this book as history. So anyone trying to say that this is pure fiction, that this is a completely made up story, then you have to tackle with the history. Okay,
Hmm.
that's simply problematic. So I think it must be history. Okay. Now the problem comes that how do we tackle those so-called historical errors or discrepancies or contradictions? Now, usually that is pointed out is the very first verse of the very first chapter in Judith, which says that it was the 12th year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar who ruled over the Assyrians in the great city of Nineveh. At that time, Arphaxad was ruling over the Medes in Ecbatana. Now, I highlighted the problematic words.
Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar allegedly ruling over Assyrians in Nineveh, which clearly, if because usually people think this is Nebuchadnezzar II, who ruled
Right.
in Babylon, and who wasn't Assyrian, and he certainly could not attack Arphaxad, who was king of the Medes, but much earlier, even before Nebuchadnezzar. So you have even this
He
problem.
Arphaxad was
Mhm.
prior to Cyrus, right? He was the king part of. Am I remember that correctly?
Yeah, even prior to Cyrus. Yes. Yeah. So you have this, what is Judith simply talking about? Clearly, the guy who wrote these, verses has no clue about history. But as I said, I mean, should we really think that something so dumb was written and it was clearly so popular, and even used for, as proof text for some doctrines and so on? We will see what actually the case is with Judith. Now, when you read the book of Judith, in chapter 5, it mentions the temple being razed to the ground and the cities were occupied, but later on, the Jews came back from the diaspora, and basically they rebuilt the temple and so on. Now, clearly, when you read this passage, it gives you the impression that now suddenly we are in the post-exilic time. Okay, when the Jews return from Babylon, they restore the temple. So how should we understand the book of Judith? So some scholars thought that. By the way, if you want to interrupt me somewhere, just do that. Feel free to do that.
Thank you. No,
If
you're
I
you're
talk
you're good.
some,
You're good for now. Yeah, great. You keep
yeah.
going for sure.
So some scholars thought that Judith is describing a more extended history, so starting before the exilic period and even extending through the exilic period into the
Hmm.
Maccabean period or something like that. And those who try to harmonize the text or with history, so some people thought that this represents the period where Manasseh actually the Jews flew from Jerusalem due to the madness of the king Manasseh, but
Hmm.
actually you don't have this destroyed temple there, so you have all these problems. And then you have other arguments that Nebuchadnezzar here is actually not Nebuchadnezzar, but Ashurbanipal, and
Was
all
he
this kind
mentioned,
of
Judith? I don't remember him being mentioned.
Judith. You mean?
Is Ashurbanipal mentioned in Judith?
No, no. But some scholars thought that
Ah,
Nebuchadnezzar is actually Ashurbanipal. For
okay,
some
okay, I see.
reason, is named Nebuchadnezzar. So people are really, it gives a hard time to explain, well, how can be the Book of Judith historical?
Mhm.
Now, I have to tell you, this is my recent research, so I'm still studying this because this is a place in history where actually even scholars are not sometimes very familiar with. This is the history in the first century BC, okay? And this great empire, as you can see on the map on the left, is huge, and it's the Great Armenian Empire. And this is a very neglected history. We don't have many records. We usually have those of some ancient historians, such as Josephus. We do have some Armenian attestations, and some Greek historians mention it as well. And in the first century, there was this great Armenian Empire, and the most noble representative of this empire was King Tigranes II the Great. Uh, and he lived in the first century and ruled this kingdom from 95 BC to 56 BC. And you will see why I do bring up this figure. As I said, I was not familiar with him. I don't know if you know who Tigranes II was.
No, I have I no familiarity with the Armenian Empire at all.
Yeah, so usually people are familiar with the Seleucids, right?
Mhm,
With the Persians, with the Babylonians, or with the Romans, of course,
right.
or with the Greeks, the Alexander the Great. But no one mentions the great Armenian Empire. But actually, it's very interesting. And during this period, you have Queen Salome Alexandra. She was basically queen in Judea, and she actually had two husbands. The first one was Aristobulus the First, who died, and she got married to Alexander Janneus later. But eventually, even Alexander Janneus died, so she became a widow in Judea. But she remained the queen, basically. And she served two sons for Alexandra. It was Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II. Now, these two figures might be a little bit familiar for you or for
Yes.
the audience. So this is the Hasmonean dynasty, basically. And the Hasmonean dynasty ends with these two figures, Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II, because they had some conflicts. And it caused the end, basically, of the Hasmonean dynasty in Judea just before the turn of the era, basically. So she is a very prominent figure, but a very unknown figure, very interestingly. So these two figures, Tigranes II and Queen Salome, are very important for our discussions in regards to the Book of Judith. So as I said, Salome is mentioned in some historical records. For example, in Josephus, this comes from the wars. So here Josephus says that Salome Alexandra also prevailed with Tigranes, king of Armenia, who lay with the
Hmm.
troops about Ptolemy and besieged Cleopatra by agreements and presents to go away, and so on and so forth. So you can see here how the clash between Salome Alexandra and Tigranes II. Later on, Josephus also mentions basically uh, Salome and Tigranes as well, and he also mentions how Tigranes was defeated by Lucullus, who was a general in the I think it was in the Roman army. So I don't not going to read the whole bunch of it, just want to demonstrate that how basically these two figures actually met and how these two figures had some affairs with each other. The interesting thing is when you start to compare the history, the written history about Queen Alexandra, Salome, and Tigranes, okay? And when you compare the history with the book of Judith. So, for example, and this comes from the scholar who basically developed this argument that actually Judith is a historical book, but it's allegorized, or not, or maybe even better word would be this that these figures are disguised.
Mm.
Okay, so the history is true. But sometimes you see that these figures are actually not presented with their real names, and some of the things are a little bit, allegorized. But still, the book does represent a historical account. So, for example, like Judith, also Queen Salome was a widow. In fact, Queen Salome was widowed even twice because both of his husbands died, right? Then, moreover, you have the author of the book of Judith presenting the heroine as a queen, because even though Judith is not named as queen as such, but she is described as such because she was very rich and her husband had left her gold and silver and servants and maids and livestock and fields. So clearly Judith was not an ordinary, a woman in Judea, but she was a very prominent
Mm.
somebody. So we see this interesting parallel again. Further, as Hellenistic ruler coming back from war, Judith is receiving the representatives of the people, in case no less than the high priest Joachim and the elders of the Israelites. However, Judith is very popular, thus all the people from the least to the greatest hurriedly assembled for her return seem unbelievable. They opened the gate. So this is what Judith says. And the common people welcome her, their heroine, or in more exact terms, their ruler, back home. Once more, this description hints at King Alexander Yanai's welcome after his last campaign, or at an unknown episode on which the author says, I will shed some light when the people of Jerusalem will come back, their ruler, Queen Salome Alexandra. So this is something I got from this scholar called Samuel Rocca, who is developing the argument that Judith is actually representing Queen Salome Alexandra.
Okay.
Last but not least,
You mentioned,
yeah.
so before we go on that last slide, you mentioned there was a prophecy about the coming Messiah there. Did I hear that correctly?
Uh, I, I'm not sure what are you referring to? Where?
You said something about um, not knowing when the Messiah would come. I thought you didn't use the word Messiah. I forget the word you
No,
said,
no,
but
no. Sorry, maybe I just butchered the word, but no, I didn't mention
oh,
Messiah.
okay, my bad,
No,
my bad. I
no.
misheard then. Okay,
Okay.
great, great.
Yeah. And you have then this other parallel that Queen Salome Alexandra was part of the Hasmonean family. And this is reflected in the text wise. The first time during Judith's prayer, she calls God as Lord God of my forefather Simeon. And now
Mm.
in this very instance, actually Simeon is not disguised, but Simeon is Simeon because in this case, Simeon must be no other else than Simeon the Maccabee, who was a very prominent figure. And so the ancestor is Simeon, who was from the Hasmonean dynasty, and brother Judah and Jonathan, and the real founder of the Hasmonean dynasty, as the first book of Maccabees indicates. So again, we have this connection that Judith is actually represented in the book of Judith as Judith. Later on, the author wrote that the Gileadites and the Galileans struck the enemy's flanks. This is in Judith 15:5. Thus, not only Galilee, but also Gilead are part of the Hasmonean kingdom, and John Hyrcanus I and King Aristobulus, brother of King Alexander Yanai, conquered Galilee. However, it was King Alexander Yanai, the husband of Queen Salome, actually, who conquered Gilead. So again, you have this parallel. So we know historically that the Hasmoneans did conquer the Gileadites and the Galilees, and this is the same thing that is reflected in the book of Judith. So, and what about basically this King Nebuchadnezzar, right, who is threatening the Jews? Well, as I said, there was no Nebuchadnezzar, but there was the great Armenian Empire, and with Tigranes the Great as the king of this empire. So in those years, Armenia under Tigranes was emerging as the new Eastern power, of course, on the ruins of the king Seleucid kingdom. Thus, Tigranes began a policy of expansion at the expenses not only the Seleucid kingdom, but also of the neighboring kingdom of Parthia, right? And according to Josephus, Queen Salome Alexandra was also facing the whole army of Tigranes. And according to Josephus, the clash between Judea and Armenia came on the issue of the founding Seleucid Syria. So again, this is very important. So we don't have Nebuchadnezzar, but we have Tigranes, who is expanding his territories and even threatens Judea now. So it is probably possible to see thus the war between Nebuchadnezzar, king of Assyria, and Arphaxad, king of the Medes, as the war between Tigranes, king of Armenia, and King Orodes, first of Parthia, where actually Armenia was expanding his territories, an ally of both Rome and Judea.
Was
So
it
the author of, sorry,
the Armenians were allies of Rome, or was Parthia? I
I
thought
think,
Parthia
yeah,
was a war of Rome.
Parthia was ally of Rome and Judea.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So the author of the Book of Judith saw this war as the beginning of Armenian expansions that will bring Armenia face to face with Hasmonean Judea. So in fact, Tigranes II had begun a war with Parthia already in the first century, and Tigranes was interested even conquering Parthia from Parthia the regions of Media and Osrani, and which he revenged actually. So thus the king of Parthia and king of Media were also conquered.
Hmm.
And the book of Judith is quite specific as it refers to a battle fought in the vast plain in the district of Ragae. This is in Judith 1:5. So the author is quite specific on the other territories taken by Tigranes II to the Parthians, and he writes that to him, so basically to Nebuchadnezzar, or aka Tigranes II, rallied all the inhabitants of the mountain regions, all who dwelt among the Euphrates, the Tigris, and the Hydaspes, and King Arioch of the Elamites in the plain. This is in Judith 1:6, and also Persia. So you see this precise, slow expansion of the Armenian kingdom, just as we see it in the book of Judith. So this is another parallel with the book of Judith.
Hmm.
So this scholar, Rocca, listed many and striking parallels between the military campaign of Tigranes and that of the so-called Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Judith. So the author of the fictional work, so-called fictional work, shows indeed a remarkable knowledge of the political, geographical, and military situations of the time. Even the description of Nebuchadnezzar's army is a detailed and realistic picture of the Armenian army.
Hmm.
And then you have also some secondary characters there in the book of Judith, which are maybe sometimes a little bit vague or are alluded to. Nevertheless, these are real people.
I was going to
And
ask the
even,
high priest Joachim if we know who the high priest was at that time.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It looks like you have uh, Achior here,
Achior, yeah.
and that would have been the high priest at the time based on our other records.
Uh, I'm not entirely sure. As I said, this stuff, I was mainly focusing on Tigranes and Judith so
Fair enough.
far,
Fair enough.
not too much on these other characters, but it seems that these characters were real. They just received a different name in the book of Judith.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Interesting.
But even when you look at the chronological, narrative and how the history went on, then it actually parallels with the secular history. So Judith lines up very perfectly with the secular history that is describing the expansion of the Armenian kingdom as well.
You have here Salome's general Antipater. That was Herod the Great's father, correct?
Uh,
Am I remembering that correctly?
Harold the Great, I'm not sure who was her. Was
I'm
he?
wondering if it's
I'm
the
not
same
sure.
person. I'm pretty sure Antipater was Herod the Great's father.
Could be.
Uh,
Could be
but
because we are now at the basically, yeah, we're in the middle of the first century, so it can be very well. Yeah, I will have to check that.
now I'm curious because I'm wondering if it's the same person.
Now, what is even very interesting when you look at how Tigranes ruled, okay, and what was his demands, that he actually also captured some Jews and he took them into the Armenian Empire. And Tigranes also forced the Jews to eat pork and meat. So they were forced just as basically the Maccabean martyrs, to transgress the laws of Moses. So
Mhm.
he did the same thing, and basically what Nebuchadnezzar did, right? So he was also forcing Daniel and all the Jews to transgress the laws of Moses. So Tigranes was no different. He was doing the same thing. So he did take Jews into his kingdom and he did force them to do unlawful things as
Mm.
well. So this is also recorded very well. We have even this figure who is Moses. I don't see now the whole name due to the presentation, but we have this Moses figure who is
Of
a
corn.
fifth century historian, and he's an Armenian actually historian, and he does basically lay down the history of Tigranes, and he does describe him as this very cruel ruler who was forcing the Jews to do these, unlawful
Mm.
things. So this is same. This might be the reason why, the author of Judith wanted to use the name Nebuchadnezzar for Tigranes because Tigranes and and Nebuchadnezzar did basically the same thing. They were all expanding. They both took the Jews. They both, asserted that the Jews should transgress the laws and all those things.
I was looking
What
on
we,
the map, on your map when you had the map on the first slide. Uh,
uh-huh.
what was the capital? I couldn't find Nineveh. Is Nineveh was Nineveh the capital of the Armenian Empire?
No, no, it wasn't. But actually, I think when I looked at the capital, because I was interested in this as well, no, Nineveh wasn't. Even though Ninus was in the map, it was Ninus, not Nineveh.
Ah, okay,
But I think the capital was, it switched from place to place during the Armenian kingdom, and when Tigranes learned, it was Tigranocentra. I think it was the name
okay.
of the capital in that day.
And that does not correspond with Nineveh.
Well, it doesn't correspond with Nineveh, but if the name of the persons doesn't correspond,
Right, right. It does. It
then
wouldn't necessarily need to.
then
Yeah,
it's not a surprise that the capital doesn't correspond to the name of
fair enough.
yeah.
Yeah, no, fair enough. By the
And
way, uh, Antipater was the father of Herod the Great. I don't know if it's the same Antipater, but that was the name of Herod the Great's father.
okay, great. So
Antip
we this have confirmed as well. So this is important because this just again confirms that we are talking about the period in the first century.
right,
So that's the history that is described in the book of Judith. It's not Nebuchadnezzar, you know, Nebuchadnezzar the second of Babylonia, actually.
right.
And even Plutarch, right, who is a secular historian or historical writer, says that now the sway of the Armenians was intolerably grievous to the. Uh, Help me out. I don't know what the word there because I don't see it now.
Uh,
To the
Intolerably
Greeks. Yeah.
grievous.
So now
Okay,
this,
so
yeah, to the Greeks. Above all else, the spirit of the king, who was Tigranes himself, had become pompous and haughty in the midst of his great prosperity. All the things which men most covet and admire, he not only had in his possession, but actually thought that they existed for his sake. Many were the kings who waited upon him and for whom he always had about him like attendants of bodyguards, would run on foot by their masters' sides when he rode out, clad in short blouses, and when he sat transacting businesses, would stand by with their arms crossed. This attitude was thought to be the plainest confession of servitude, as if they had sold their freedom and offered their persons to their master to dispose for suffering rather than for service. So you see again the cruelty of Tigranes, how is described over and over again, both in Armenian records and both in these secular writers like
Hmm.
Plutarch and Josephus, and then you have it confirmed in the book of Judith. So everything lines up very well.
That's
Now,
fascinating.
Gabriele Boccaccini says, after reading Armenian and Greek sources, it is no wonder that Tigranes could be understood as the new Nebuchadnezzar. As Nebuchadnezzar, Tigranes liked to be surrounded and served by the captured kings, and as Nebuchadnezzar, Tigranes pursued a policy of religious intolerance. As Nebuchadnezzar, Tigranes deported large masses of population. So everything lines up. So I think this is the reason why the author of the book of Judith intended to give the name Nebuchadnezzar instead of Tigranes. Now the question is, well, why didn't he just plainly give his true name, right? Now, as I said, well, if we are going to demand the same thing and be consistent, then we should also demand, in the book of Daniel, why Daniel didn't list the name of those kings.
Hmm.
No.
Let me ask you
Now,
this: do
mhm.
we have, because I could easily see a Protestant objecting or anyone objecting that the Book of Daniel is prophetic literature, which is, the Jewish apocalyptic literature is a genre to itself where one would expect everything to be masked by signs and symbols, and names don't necessarily correlate to their real fulfillment. But with the Book of Judith, it's a history book that's masking the names. If your theory is correct, then do we have any precedent for that in Jewish literature? Is this a genre that we have a name for? Are there other books that do a similar thing, or would this be kind of its own first in historical narratives in the culture?
Yes, well, we need to remember when you say apocalyptic literature, that's a modern scholarly phrase,
Fair
okay?
enough.
So the church never used this phrase that it's an apocalyptic literature. So
Hmm.
Daniel was a prophet, okay? And everybody agrees Daniel was a historical figure. Everybody agreed in the church, and everybody agreed among the Jews. Now, apocalypse or apocalyptic simply means that he had revelation. That's fine. But as I said, the argument isn't what Daniel wrote down. The argument is, did Daniel know what he is writing, what he is talking about? Did
Hmm.
Daniel himself know who actually those beasts represent? And I would argue he knew that
Hmm.
he's talking about the Seleucids, he's talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, and so on. So my question is, if he knew, why did he purposely, you know, wrote down that these are beasts and not actually people? You know,
Yeah.
even if it's a prophecy, even if it's about upcoming events, but he could have written that down. He certainly had to know what he's talking about.
And
He was inspired.
you would not argue that this is written in advance of this. This would be a history written after the fact, correct? For Judith?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
I of course I will continue with my response, but
Yeah,
I
sorry,
just
sorry.
wanted
Yeah.
to offer this pushback that just because
Yeah.
Daniel is apocalyptic, it doesn't change the thing that Daniel knew what he was talking about.
Yeah, no, and it makes sense to me. It is a curiosity to me that a book with a genre of history would do this.
Hmm.
Prophetic writings in general are known for that. If we don't have to use the name apocalyptic literature, but prophetic writings in general are known for the signs and the symbols and names that don't necessarily properly correspond to the fulfillment. But
Yes.
yeah, history we don't see that as much with it. Maybe we have. That's why I was wondering if we have other examples of a history that does something
Well,
similar in the
uh,
period.
well, we do something not exactly similar, but for example, we know that who was this? The Persian king, the Mede,
Cyrus,
Cy- not Cyrus.
Cyrus.
One of the kings had this, not surname, but Darius, Darius the Mede,
Oh
right?
yes, yes, Darius the Great. Yeah.
So Darius is described as an Assyrian king in Ezra, if you look at Ezra, and he was not Assyrian.
Hmm.
Okay, so second thing is no one knows who Darius the Mede is because we don't have anything from secular literature that would even hint to that such a figure like Darius the Mede existed.
Right, right. Because Darius the Mede being it seems to be distinct from Darius the Great from history. Correct?
Seems to be, but usually that's not how he is described. Usually he is basically thought to be the same as Darius.
Right. And to me, I see that
And in the
objection.
book of Ezra, it is explicitly said that he's the king of Assyrians,
Yeah.
but
Which
he was Persian.
well, the Persian that would go back to one of those arguments I think is petty from skeptics because the Persian Empire conquered Babylon and Assyria, and it was the successor to those two empires. So
Right, but it
yeah,
wasn't Assyria. So Babylon conquered Assyria, and the
right,
Persians conquered Babylon, not Assyria,
right.
right?
But one that owns all three could be. I'm trying to think of a parallel example. Yeah, I'm at a loss for a
I
parallel
look,
example, but
look,
it seems to me that yeah,
I agree with you. I agree with you. I'm not trying to, argue.
yeah,
I agree. I agree with your argumentation. I'm just saying if somebody wants to be nitpicking,
yeah.
then we can also say,
Oh,
well,
also, didn't the Persians conquer the Medes prior to? Because I'm pretty sure Arphaxad, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who prior to Cyrus the Great had because the Medes and the Persians were two different groups, but they had kind of united prior to Cyrus the Great. Uh, and it seems to me that one could potentially call them the same. Even in Esther, we hear the
yes,
law
that
of the Medes
yes,
and the
but
Persians.
yes, but Darius was not from the Medes.
Correct. Yeah, it's just it seems to me there was a bit of a mingling of those two groups, similar to how we might have uh, me being from America, you could call me a Native American. Yeah, but I'm not but I'm not native to. I'm not a Native American, but I am native to America. There's a level of well, I'm German. I'm a second generation German, so yeah, I'm
Oh,
German. Well, I'm also American though. But so yeah, it seems to me that well, I'm here now. I'm an American now. So
right.
I can see. I could see someone say in the same period, it's like, yeah, sure, he's not a native Mede. He doesn't have that ancestry, but the same way I'm American, but I'm not a native American, but I am native to America. I was born here.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. I feel like that's kind of nitpicky that someone, that someone could, the Mede argument seems to be a picky one to me. I seems you could rightfully call him a Mede. It's just he's not by blood, he's by conquest, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, I do agree everything you said. I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah.
saying that,
That's skeptics
sometimes
claim though.
sometimes you need to develop these arguments, basically.
Yeah.
But so the reason why I think, and I don't know if I have this on the other slides. No, I think I don't have. Uh, so the reason why I think these figures are disguised can be on two things. First is that it is speculated that the writer was a Sadducee because the Hasmoneans are sometimes connected with the Sadducees. And
Really?
so, in order to basically make this book acceptable, it had to be somehow the figures had to be these guys. So Salome actually, uh, and Boccaccini goes over it, but I didn't want to
Hmm.
include this in the article, that she was victorious, but on the other hand, she actually was the caused the end of the Hasmonean dynasty as well. So as I
Hmm.
said, Aristobulus the second and Hyrcanus the second basically ended the Hasmonean dynasty. And there were these conflicts between the Pharisees and the Sadducees and so on. So one reason could be that the persons had to be disguised is due to some political influence, or
Hmm.
the clash between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And the other thing could be that while Salome was actually victorious against the Armenians, but she had to do some steps which would not shed some very good light on her. So therefore, the author who basically wanted to promote Salome, Alexandra, had to somehow disguise her.
Hmm.
Now, whether this is absolutely true or not, I cannot prove it, right? So, but just because these figures are disguised and they are given other names, that doesn't mean that the whole story is fictitious and erroneous. As I said,
Hmm.
you can establish that there is an error when you can establish that the writer had absolutely no hint about history, about the political affairs, about the military affairs, and about everything. That's just the opposite. What we see is that the writer wrote a very precise history. The author very precisely knew who Tigranes was, who Queen Salome was, what was the problem, how the expansion occurred, how the deportation of the Jews occurred, what a terrible king this was. Yet all he did, he changed the names, he changed the names of the towns. Like for example, also Bethulia. Bethulia, we don't know where Bethulia is, which is mentioned in the book of Judith, right?
Okay.
But this is
Yeah.
actually the city where these events, where Holofernes was beheaded. So these are very important. These would be very important locations on the map, but we don't know where it is. So, and even the name Bethulia means, I think, virgin, God's virgin. It means God's virgin. When you
Oh, interesting.
Okay, so
I was
clearly,
wondering that what it meant.
yeah, so clearly, this
Very
city
logical
is
archetypes there or prototypes there.
right, right. So why did the author choose to do this? I don't know. Okay, but I
Yeah.
don't think the uh, the author didn't know what he's writing about. He intentionally changed the names of the figures and the places and the towns.
Yeah.
And if it's an intention, then it's not an error. There's a reason behind it. Always the all thing that matters is that he was correct. Why did he change it? I don't know. I don't know the intentions of the author, but that doesn't mean he was wrong.
Well, that's fascinating. That seems to be. I mean, this is not a period of history that I'm familiar with as much with the Armenian Empire, but based on what you've described, that seems like it fits quite perfectly. And that's an amazing explanation that doesn't have to resort to what I see as a very modern and contrived kind of ad hoc explanation of it being just a parable. This
Right.
seems to explain things much better.
So the main thing is to establish that it is historical, right? So if
Yeah.
we go with this narrative, then you can say, well, I can affirm that it's historical, but at the same time, I do see the intentions of the author to allegorize something or change the names
Yeah.
or do these things. So I
The
can be
minor
in line,
details.
right, right. So I can be in line both with church history and also explain, some difficulties in the texts.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you for preparing this and going over that. That's very helpful. Um, just as an explanation for this. And you've given me some homework because now I'm going to have to read more about the Armenian Empire. And I've been working the last few years actually studying just kind of the ancient world. And
Hmm.
I've heard of the Armenian Empire, but that's something I'm going to have to study more. I'm trying to get like a for my own studies. I've been trying to get a good concept, a good understanding of the world around the biblical events. And yeah, I've been studying all the empires and nations that kind of pop up in the Bible and how they connect to it in their own histories. And that was not one on my list, so you made some work for me. But that's good. That's a good thing because I enjoy this stuff. But
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Uh,
You're welcome. And and this is just the last slide. I think it's quite
yeah.
also amusing that Boccaccini says that even in a very recent biography in 1940, an Armenian author called Herkant K. Armen, dedicated to Tigranes, we read a vivid description of the dramatic encounter between the Armenians and the Jews, and he says that Tigranes is the new Nebuchadnezzar and the trembling Jewish ambassadors sent by Queen Alexandra
Mhm.
of Jerusalem. So when you read this whole passage, you see that this Armenian author actually calls
That is
Tigranes
fascinating.
as the new Nebuchadnezzar. So that's intriguing.
Salome being called Judith would make sense as a representative of Judah as well. It would be a feminine form of that. So I can see why they would call her Judith. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like calling the king of David, the king of the Davidic king Judah or David. It's Jesus being the son of David, for example. Obviously, he's not a literal son of David, but he's descended of him. He's of the Davidic line. They weren't
Yes.
Davidic, probably, that we know of. I know there's some questions about who the Hasmoneans were exactly, but um, were they Zadokites? Uh, I know they were from the tribe of Judah, but there's some hint they might have been Zadokites as well. So they have some lineage from the Levites also. But
Hmm.
um, you know, them being descendant though of the tribe of Judah and the ruler now of Judah makes sense that they would call her Judith as a symbol of the representative government in that period. So very fascinating, very very fascinating. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Um, I guess I don't know if we have time for this now. Maybe we, if you ever want to do this again, I'm interested still in discussing your work. You did a fascinating series of talks on
Hmm.
Esdras, and that might be too long for the next couple minutes that we have. So I don't know if you ever want to
Sure.
come back on. We could discuss that. I'd be interested in talking about uh, the three books that the Orthodox have that you've been researching,
Hmm.
Esdras and Manasseh, and what is it? Third Maccabees? Is that the other one? What's the third book they
Yes,
have
third
that we don't?
Maccabees. Yes.
Third
And
Maccabees.
they got also Psalms 151.
Yes, indeed.
And
Yes, indeed.
and then it depends which Orthodox you're talking about. For example, the Russians have also fourth Ezra, which they call actually third Esdras.
The naming
So
conventions of Ezra is just someone needs to fix that. There's four different Ezras, and everyone numbers them differently. So we got to figure something out. uh,
yeah,
but
actually you have six Esdras
six Ezras. Okay.
because fourth Ezra is sometimes divided into three, so it's fourth, fifth, sixth.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness.
yeah.
Yeah. If we talk about that, we're gonna have to come up with a consistent naming convention the whole way through because it
Right.
confuses me. Just read trying to I've read some articles on the books. It's just like, this is just too much to even if I want to read them, which one am I even reading? I don't even know which one I'm reading because they're depending on depending on who published it, they're gonna number it differently. But
Exactly.
so I think we'll call it quits. And let me just check to see if I had any other quick questions that might that written down that
Hmm.
might be doable in the next 2 minutes or so. But I think that's probably everything that we have time for. But tell me about just promote yourself. Anything that you want to say on the way out. What you're working on, upcoming episodes on your channel. Anything that you want to self promote that my viewers might want to tune in for your channel for. I don't have a ton of viewers yet, but the few that do, maybe they could learn something from your channel. I'd highly recommend them checking out your channel.
Right. So, thank you. So, whoever is interested in the defense of the Deuterocanon and the history of the Old Testament canon, I highly recommend to check out the Apocrypha Apocalypse channel, as we mentioned in the beginning. And I'm constantly working on some things, to contribute to the channel. And in the near future, I'm also going to have a debate on the canon with my partner William. We will join two Protestants, and so yeah, I hope the
Love a good
audience will
debate.
enjoy it.
Yeah, that's exciting. Well, I look forward to that, and people should tune in to see that because there's a lot. You guys do a lot of good work over there. But David, thank you again for joining me, and God bless.
Thank you very much. God bless you. Thank you.
Thanks.